Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and I just wanted to show you my face so that you know that I'm still alive and kicking. It has been a long month for me, an even longer month perhaps for my former laptop, which became a fire hazard overnight, and that's the reason that you haven't been seeing any new content from me. But I am borrowing a laptop. It is not exactly what I want, but with a little work, I can make Resolve work on it. So I am going to put out some videos, maybe a little bit slower than usual, but I just wanted to let you guys know what's happening and that I do plan to keep putting out the same high quality content. Hopefully I'll have a brand new laptop that's up to snuff coming soon. Maybe by the end of the month. I am ordering a refurb because that's what I could afford for the quality that I want, and that means I'm on a waiting list. So we'll see what happens with that. In the meantime, enjoy the video. I just want to note that I wrote this before my laptop died, and there have been some updates to this story that I will be publishing in a future video, but in the meantime, let's look at the future that could have been. As I'm writing the book, The Journey to a New America, and through my research becoming more familiar with these often unspoken elements of history, I'm also beginning to see history repeating itself in the events happening even as I felt the stories I was telling were over. One of these stories that's unfolding right now is happening in the unlikely state of Alabama, as the retail, wholesale, and department store union seems to be getting closer every day to winning a historic uphill battle against one of the most consistently anti-union companies in modern America, Amazon. The battle to unionize the Amazon workers of Alabama seems uncertain, but this may very well lead to a nationwide paradigm shift.
These warehouses have grown so much in the last year. There were already so many of them, and now we've added like 400,000 more Amazon workers, 50% more warehouse space around the country just this past year. So increasingly, this warehouse work, this fulfillment work, is becoming really sort of the new kind of mass option for the sort of entry level, low skill job for the working class in this country. And if this is the reality for now for hundreds of thousands of American workers, if you want to lift up that kind of work, it's really going to mean focusing on these warehouses and organizing them and kind of getting them to the point where other forms of sort of entry-level work were in decades past. Manufacturing became a sort of middle-class, stable, sustainable family job for a lot of families because those jobs were lifted up through organizing in the last century. And the big question now is whether we can sort of do the same for this kind of warehouse work.
All over the country, it's like Amazon workers are waking up to the realization that there's a very real possibility of them being represented by a large and powerful union, if they're willing to ask. Retail, wholesale, and department store union representatives say their phones have been ringing off the hook much more often than usual since this story hit the news. Amazon workers all over the country are reaching out to the RWDSU to see if they can help them fight for better compensation and working conditions. This idea is like an epidemic of realization for Amazon workers, and I don't doubt that when, and not if, RWDSU finds success in unionizing an Amazon plant, this epidemic will begin to jump to new hosts, like Walmart, the company poster child for being anti-union big retail in America even before Amazon flooded the new online markets of the 21st century. And when the first Amazon or Walmart locations find themselves represented by a union, there's no doubt a demand for a national union will emerge. As this reaches a fever pitch, I hope that a few old American paradigms become untenable. The excuse that workers don't really want unions and unions don't help. Because when the Walmart worker doing your job across the county line makes 50% more than you do per hour because of their union status, you're going to want to transfer or start a union in your county as well. It's not that there are no unions in America today, but there are a few that have really been able to break into many household industries except for automobiles, owing to the successful unionization efforts of the United Auto Workers in the early 1930s. At the time, it had been customary for presidents to intervene and stop attempts at high-profile unions like the UAW from forming. It's important to remember for context that it was more than a decade before that when President Harding bombed the West Virginian mountains to break a strike at the cost of the lives of a great many striking coal miners. So even FDR's hands-off approach in the 1930s was credited as if he gave his blessing to the Union's formation. Not much more was needed then. After all, this era was the climax of the socialist groundswell that America experienced in the early 1900s. They knew how to start a union, to say the least. The paradigm is perhaps the opposite now. We are at the beginning of a socialist groundswell in America, and our power is building, but yet unstable. We have yet to win a definitive battle, but over the last few years it's felt like time and time again, victory might soon be at hand. In that respect, the fledgling spark of a union revival could use a lot more outside support than the UAW did in the 1930s. If his words are believed, Joe Biden is one of the most outspoken pro-union presidents in American history, even though his record doesn't necessarily reflect this. But to the American people, it does seem to have truthiness, even though so much of Biden's platform seems more dubious. Biden ran on comparisons to FDR, though the lifelong fiscal conservative had little substance to back it up. However, to his credit, since the Alabama union drive began, he did deliver a speech showing union membership in a positive light. He wasn't so bold as to mention Amazon, but those in the know, that was clearly the context that prompted the speech. It's honestly great that this movement is more union forward than FDR initially was, but through the influence of people like Sidney Hillman, FDR changed a lot over his long term as a US president. If you're going to compare yourself to FDR, at least have the decency to be more of a 1944 FDR, instead of aiming for a somewhat more progressive leader in 1933, one still within the norms of that decade. If someone like Eugene Debs was president at this time, he would be doing a lot more than mentioning that unions are cool in a speech. Debs would speak Amazon's name directly. He would be in Alabama letting those workers know that they had their president's support in their decision because he was a real pro-union president. This is probably true of Bernie as well, and I wouldn't be shocked if he plans to do so over the next month or so. This contrast is perhaps Biden's biggest failing to me, at least what makes him feel like a fake progressive. He's constantly unwilling to really utilize the bully pulpit to push for the changes he claims to support. Radical change needs radical support, and Biden isn't willing to be seen as a radical president. It's hard to say though, because Bernie has been so busy over the last few years. A bill called the PRO Act, Protecting the Right to Organize, is nearly a carbon copy of the Workplace Democracy Act Bernie pushed to pass 8 times over his career and as a part of his 2020 platform. If this were to become law, it would fulfill perhaps more of Bernie's campaign promises than Biden's, which should be an example to us all in how to effectively wield power no matter your place in the hierarchy. Even though this amendment to the National Labor Relations Act seems to bear Bernie's fingerprints, it was proposed by Virginia Democrat Bobby Scott and has been working its way through the meat grinder of law since 2019. This is actually the second time since its introduction that it's passed the House, and it may not stand better chances in the Senate now than it did under Trump with the narrowest of majorities. The Democrats would have trouble getting it past a filibuster, and there's no guarantee that all of the Senate Democrats would vote for it anyways. While it isn't Bernie's bill, it might be a little bit more expansive than Bernie's proposal in 2018. Everyone seems to agree that the two bills were based on one another, and I wouldn't be shocked if Bernie handed his idea off to the relatively more conservative Bobby Scott. This is a tactic he's used many times with legislation he thought would be less likely to pass if people thought of it as a Bernie bill. Biden has indicated that he would sign this bill if passed, but people like Bobby Scott and Bernie Sanders are the bill's more vocal supporters by far. This would indicate that Biden isn't at an early FDR at best, and it's not clear if Bernie can play the role that Hillman did. But supporting the first serious amendment to the NLRA they passed together would be a good start.
Heaven forbid we pass something that's going to help the damn workers in the United States of America.
Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan yelled at Republicans over their opposition to the PRO Act, which is the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which of course is labor reform that both helps unions to form, but also helps to protect unions once they're formed.
Mr. Speaker, one of the earlier speakers said, This is the most dramatic change in labor law in 80 years. And I say, thank God. In the late 70s, a CEO made 35 times the worker. Today, it's 300 to 400 times the worker. And our friends on the other side, running around with their hair on fire. Heaven forbid we pass something that's going to help the damn workers in the United States of America. Heaven forbid we tilt the balance that has been going in the wrong direction for 50 years. We talk about pensions, you complain. We talk about the minimum wage increase, you complain. We talk about giving them the right to organize, you complain. But if we were passing a tax cut here, you'd be all getting in line to vote yes for it. Now stop talking about Dr. Seuss and start working with us on behalf of the American workers. I yield back to...
Whether or not Biden is poised to live up to the New Deal rhetoric, with bills like this, Medicare for All, a huge overhaul of voting rights, infrastructure, and more, perhaps the House of Representatives is more willing to treat this like a fifth FDR term. Long term, I think the deciding factor in whether or not the administration can follow through on these efforts will hinge on the Senate filibuster.
I think everyone knows the President of the United States, President Obama, and the Republican leadership have reached an agreement on a very significant tax bill. In my view, the agreement that they reached is a bad deal for the American people. I think we can do better. And I am here today to take a strong stand against this bill, and I intend to tell my colleagues and the nation exactly why I am in opposition to this bill. And you can call what I'm doing today whatever you want. You can call it a filibuster, you can call it a very long speech. I'm not here to set any great records or to make a spectacle. I am simply here today to take as long as I can to explain to the American people the fact that we have got to do a lot better than this agreement provides.
Rules have changed since Bernie's Obama-era attempt, and 8-hour speeches are no longer required.
Like so many people, I watched this filibuster and was sort of agape at not only how long you were able to hang in there and just talk, but that you had fresh material. It wasn't like you were saying the same thing over and over again. I mean, you literally spoke about income inequality for 8 hours?
It was more than that, but what it was, and I think the reason it generated as much interest as it did, is what I talked about is not often talked about on the floor of the Senate. And I think, you know, a long period of time before you hear people talking about the growing gap between the very, very rich and everybody else, or the collapse of the middle class, or what it means both morally and economically when you have so few who have so much and so many who have so little. Those are themes not usually discussed here in Washington for kind of obvious reasons. So I think it kind of hit a nerve around the country and generated some interest.
Further, Democrats are unwilling to overrule Republican filibusters, even though the Republicans would never offer them the same kindness. Biden wants us to return to the talking filibuster. And while this would likely help, as none of these Republicans have the grit of even 2010 Bernie, it's an unnecessary half measure. As long as there is any balance between the two parties, the Republicans will always hold an edge in the Senate. Maybe not a majority, but their numbers falling below 41 seems unlikely. And if Democrats stand by current norms regarding the filibuster, it would take 60 to 61 Democrats to break filibuster, even if the party voted as a cohesive bloc. Something conservative Democrats in the Senate aren't always willing to concede to. I think the math is clear. With the current norms, no serious change is possible in Congress without some sort of filibuster reform. Another paradigm shift that I think we'll see in 2021 is the further expansion of acceptance of government support. It wasn't what we hoped it would be, but as I've made clear by now, it does break new ground in significant ways that will undoubtedly have a similar effect to the increases in unemployment and stimulus checks did last year. A new $300 per month per child check to parents approved for last year was passed as a part of the 2021 COVID-19 relief bill. This may not be a permanent change, but for the next 9 months, American families for the first time will experience a program that's actually fairly common in other developed European countries. I can't imagine people will want to easily give that up in 2022, even if the pandemic is completely over by then, because it's a common sense benefit parents needed a long time before the virus crashed the economy, with a little help from the folks on the Hill. Taken together, the cumulative COVID-19 relief packages have represented the government wealth transfer to the wealthy oligarchs that are common in any of our crises. It also represented the greatest modern government attack on poverty in recent history. It wasn't enough by far, but it did clear the low bar set by the disaster that post-Reagan neoliberalism has been for the poor and the middle class. And despite what conservatives like Biden have often said, even after giving normal people billions in aid, the sky didn't come falling around us. It helped us in concrete material ways that many of us aren't soon to forget. History will tell us if this is a part of the death moan of neoliberalism as it proves itself publicly invalid. Will this be enough for the big other to finally admit that neoliberalism is at fault and that we must find a 21st century alternative? In another example of history repeating, things in Nevada are suddenly reminding people more and more of Burlington, Vermont.
So on March 6th, Democratic Socialists won all 5 party leadership positions in the Nevada State Democratic Party. Judith Whitmer was elected chair of the party. Not long after this victory, Whitmer received an email from the Democratic Party's executive director, Alana Mounts, quote, making clear that everyone on the small staff had resigned.
In 2016, Bernie campaigned extensively against Hillary Clinton in Nevada and seeded a solid foundation for a grassroots movement to grow upon. In 2016, this kept him neck and neck with his political rival in the Nevada primary. After doubling down on the movement building there in 2020, he swept the state in a race full of liberal competition. While Bernie lost that primary too, though not in Nevada, his influence would cause a much more meaningful change later that same year when Nevada voters chose to replace the liberal Democratic leadership with one made entirely of DSA Democrats. While they controlled the leadership positions for the state party, there are still many other liberals in the party, and national vestiges of the party still provide a lot of funding to the Nevada state chapter. Or at least they did.
Just ahead of the balloting, the party moved $450,000 out of the coffers and into the coffers of the DSCC. Also, the staff will all be getting severance through the end of the month. And anybody who has quit a job knows that when you quit,
you don't get severance.
You quit. That's not. So what does that mean? So they're walking out with a lot of the money, just in their pockets. Some of it went to other organizations, but some of it went to their pockets.
This is a bit shocking, but not entirely surprising. Behind the scenes in the 2020 primary, many Democratic operatives said that they'd rather see Trump win than allow Bernie and the progressive wing to take over their party. Biden ran not only for the soul of the nation, but for control of the future of the Democratic Party. This was contrary, of course, to their public messaging, not very vote blue no matter who. While the right wing is often compared to a death cult, reflect that the Democrats would have given us another 4 years of Trump rather than to lose their power to Bernie and America's growing electoral left wing. I have a hard time not seeing that as a death sentence to many Americans, proving how useless he proved himself to be in a crisis. The Nevada results reminded me of Bernie's first 2 terms as the mayor of Burlington, where in 2 terms he organized a movement to sweep the board of aldermen in a single election because they were obstructing him in his first term. Perhaps the greatest victory of Bernie's 2 runs for president is the way that he disseminated his grassroots movement and spent time stoking the flames of revolution all over the country. Those fires may not have burned brightly enough for him, but in Alabama and Nevada, they are catching on. 2 states where before 2016 you never would have expected to hear major socialist victories or even liberal ones. From here on out, it will be up to us to pump the bellows on these fires, because it's highly unlikely that we will see Bernie Sanders running again in 2024. I want to say a very special thank you to everyone who has made it to the end of this video, and as YouTube obligates me to, I have to remind you that if you like this video, smash the like button and subscribe and do all that social stuff, because it really helps the channel grow. If you want to support the channel in other ways, like Real Progressives or these other Foxy patrons do, you can always donate at Patreon or make a one-time donation at Ko-fi, and help me afford to take the time out to do the work and do the research and keep making content like this, while also being able to keep it commercial free. Thanks so much to everyone who supports this channel. I wouldn't want to do it without you all.